So I guess we could start the meeting. We got everybody that we need except for Mark, and he'll be calling in. So this is a special meeting. Looks like we have a quorum.
There he is.
Is that you, Mark? Hello, this is Mark. Oh, perfect. Great.
Okay, we're just getting the meeting going here. Present at the meeting, we got Glenn Reed, the Harbor Master Glow, Joseph Quisland, Bob Martin, Dave Tinas, Jeff Funt, and myself, Mike Bangs, and we have a couple people. Joe Nelson's here, and so is Mark Jensen and Chris Jensen. So, okay, well, I'm not real sure on what we want to accomplish at this meeting other than to go over the electrical question about whether we're going to go to install 480 in the North Harbor for more than one vessel. So I guess I'll turn it over to, you had a question about why you called the meeting?
Well, I was kind of a little bit concerned because I understood, for the record, this is Mark Jensen speaking, that the cost was going to be $120,000. And it was going to be, at that cost, to supply potentially 4 more 480 volt hookups. And then later on got an email that said from P&D, Dick Somerville, that said it was going to be pushing high end of $175,000. So I thought it should be revisited by the Harbor Board.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Dick, did you want to just kind of briefly explain what the differences are from?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Mark was working with you folks on a couple different options to actually do the electrical piece, and he had the opportunity to work with Anchor Electric a little bit on some preliminary pricing, and so what he was reporting to you guys was 2 options early on for just the electrical piece. Once that got done, and he came back to Juneau, we had to talk about how to actually get the service feeders into the floats and then down the gangways and up on the approach dock with the new transformer. So we went through all of that, and we actually have to add some electrical cable trays in about half of float 1 and then a piece of the head float. And then we have to actually add conduit onto the gangway and arrange for a new transformer up there. So there's some structural work that had to be added to the electrical piece. And then, of course, the electrical subcontractor has to give his price to the general contractor, which would be Western Dock and Bridge, and they're entitled to a markup on that. So I merely took Mark's estimate, added some markup to it, and added to it those structural features, and so that's why I got to 150 to 175. So his comparison was just an apple electrical cost only comparison.
Okay, thanks, Dick. Does anybody have any questions about the scenario here, what we're looking at? So where do we want to go from here? We want to let Mark
Sure.
let us know what he's thinking. What do you think, Mark?
Morris.
Yeah.
Mark Morris, excuse me. Mark.
We took a look at, this last week we called around to some shipyards to try to get an idea of what you guys might be seeing for future vessels. Power needs for some of the new ones. And we talked to Delta and FBO and Fred Wall and Platypus Marine. And folks said that what they're seeing and what they're seeing in the future for, we asked them for vessels in the 60 to 100 foot range, seiners, longliners, tenders, and they said by and large most of those fleets still are wanting 208 volt power. Only in a rare case would they want 480. Fred Wall did say that they are in the process of marketing a 119 foot vessel, and that those would all come out with 480. So for the size of your slips, 75 foot slips, vessels that are typically going to be in the in that 80-foot range are going to most likely need 208. If you're going to overburthen those slips and put in 100-plus foot vessels, then you're probably going to have some requests for 480 in the future for those slips. Based on what we've seen for your use now, is you've got 4 people that use 480 volt, and 2 of the boats have said that they can switch, and 2 have said that they can't. And so I think it's inevitable that you're going to have a minor number of your fleet wanting 480 in the future. I think it's pretty unrealistic to think that in Petersburg's future over the next 30 years that you're only going to have 2 vessels in your entire fleet that want 480.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I have a question. If these boats are being built with 480 and there's mostly 280 available in most harbors throughout the state, are they building these with transformers so that they can use either 208 or 480?
Well, if a boat is wired for 480, if it comes with 480 and you try to give it 208, then you get the objection that we're getting from one of your vessel owners there, and that is that they would need to provide their own transformer. And when you step the voltage down like that, you need almost 2.5 times more power in terms of amperage to get the same amount of energy. So, yes, they could provide their own transformer and get 208 volt power and get it up to 480. But for example, if you give them 100 amps at 208, that's 40-something amps at 480. So it can be done, and you can use it to run your bilge pumps and things like that. But you'll experience the same thing you're experiencing right now with one of your vessel owners in terms of, that there's very little on their vessel they can run.
Well, my question is, if they're building these boats with 480, these new vessels, these yachts and stuff, are they putting transformers on them when they build them so that they're not going to be? I mean, they couldn't come around and plug in to most any harbor in the state and get 480. So I would think that they would, when they build them, they would build them with transformers. Is that?
Yeah, we didn't talk to them this week about that, whether or not a 480 volt vessel comes stock with a 208 to 480 volt transformer. But it's certainly something that if they're not doing now, they certainly could do. And there's a cost to it, but in the grand scheme of the cost of the boat, it wouldn't be that big of a deal.
What would the cost?
Ask that specific question.
Do you have a ballpark of what it would cost to retrofit, say, a boat that has 480 to put a transformer on them?
Well, that's a difficult question because cost and space on vessels are normally highly interrelative. If you've got all the room in the world, then $15,000-$20,000 would get you the very beginnings, and somebody that has a nice vessel, would probably spend more like $25,000 to $30,000 getting it done in a very nice way. But if they needed something that was small, that they didn't want to sacrifice deck space, house space, etc., then it could be more expensive. But I think $15,000 to $25,000 is probably a decent range to think about it. But that's not to give them the same amount of capacity in 208 that they would have in 480. That's just to get the voltage switched. Does that make sense? If somebody's got a 480 volt, 100 amp service to their vessel, you're going to have to give them 3 100 amp plugs in order for them to get an equivalent amount of power. You really need 2.5 plugs, but they don't come that way, right? So it would be incredible. So in terms of a transient thing, just to plug in the microwave while you're powered in port to run a few lights, I'm sure every single one of those boats that has 480 has a little converter to 208 3-phase, and they've got another one to 120 240 single-phase because they want to plug in anywhere they go. But those would be very low energy conversions. If it was going to be home ported, then it would probably want a conversion that $20,000, you could take 208 three-phase and convert it to 480 and give somebody 30 amps or something like that, enough to run their microwave and their bilge pump and, their lights and things like that.
Right now, our 480 out there is 60 amps. Is that right, Joe? Do you know? Do you have 60 amp?
I think that's correct. But
I think it's
that's what
60. It's not a full 100.
You talking about for the Kestrel?
Yeah, and Chris. I think there's 60 amp. 480.
Does anybody have any questions?
I'm 60 amps, Will.
What? You're 60 amps?
I'm 60 amps,
Yeah, I think they all are. I don't know what the Kestrel says. They might be a bit bigger.
And Chris, are you 60 amp too, or?
Yeah, I must be. We're all coming off the same feed, off the wire. I'd have to look, but yes.
So it would be a 200
So to
amp
take a
service?
100 amp service at 3-phase 100 amp, what he's saying is to get the 480, he'd only get 40 some amps to plug in his 40, which probably wouldn't be enough to run your crane and that kind of stuff if you're getting 60 amps now.
So Chris, do you use, when you're plugged in, you don't run your generators, you just use the,
If I can't, then I run the generators. Right now, when we originally had the service brought down by Art Murphy, and that's why I rewired my boat, because we had the 480 service at the time. We didn't have the.
So, Chris, did you just change your motors, or did you change the
Yeah, pretty
wire?
much just the motors, yeah. They draw less amperage once you get going. They're a little more expensive, but
Yeah,
they just.
but the wiring is still there for 208.
Yeah, I've got a 2.8 service in Seward,
Yeah.
but we can't run anything. It just.
But
it
if you
keeps it-
change your motors to 208, then you could run the 208.
But I prefer not to, because everything's, my generators are cranking 480 right now.
So the
They must go
generator,
through something to step it down with the smaller motors, but I got 50 horse motors and everything, so that's why we went to the,
I wonder if they're the type that you could wire 208 or 480 or.
I'm sure you probably can, you'd have to go through somebody
Yeah.
who knows what's talking about, not just me. I crank them up and I crank them down, so.
Right. Yeah, there is usually, some wires that you can, how you
It's pretty much good.
sequence them that.
right.
so we have to figure out whether we have the funding for doing something like this, or if we feel like there's a necessity that warrants the expense. And that's where I'm at. I'm just not sure whether, I understand Chris's situation, or not being able to get 480 if we go ahead with Plan A, but if we spend this money, it's a lot of money for one boat. It'd almost be cheaper to put all new motors in, I guess. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of how we can get over this hurdle without borrowing more money or something. I don't know. What do you guys think? I'm just kind of.
Well, I ran into Dan Wormwood last night, and he's running the new Fred Wall boat. I haven't seen it. He's
Brand new
down
one,
Harbor. Yeah.
Kaya, yeah.
Yeah,
she's just
and
did it.
that all runs on 480. So I'm not sure how he's plugged in. He's just running it. He doesn't necessarily know how it's wired, and how those conversions go internally in there. But
What boat is that?
Kaya.
yeah, it's another like Robert's.
Is it here?
Yeah, it's in the loading zone.
The Robert Bigness thing?
Yep.
Is it one of Bob's boats?
No.
Is that boat interested in?
Dick, I
Well,
have
I mean,
a question
if-
for you. This is Kurt. Sure. Hey, Dick, those are a couple of big round numbers there. Of course, you guys probably haven't wanted to spend any funds, putting ink to paper there, but your estimate, this ballpark, is between 150 and 175, right? Yeah. Haven't actually sent anything to the contractor yet to actually get a formal proposal, but maybe Mark can explain what he got, how he determined his estimate. Mark, was that with some help from Bill Schattenberg at Anchor?
No, what I did is I did a standard engineer's estimate as if I was designing it from scratch, and put together the estimated labor that I thought it would take and the materials cost based on recent quotes that I've received for certain kinds of materials from distributors, and then I backed out the savings that the contractor would receive from not having to provide that power center that we had designed to provide one vessel, the Kestrel, 480 volts, and that's how I came in with 120. And then Bill, subsequent, I gave him this. I did some sketches that were provided to the Harbor Board. I gave Bill those sketches, those engineers' calculations, and based on that, he came up with his own number, and I think it was
Slightly less, wasn't it?
yeah, it was slightly less, and but we did not have the general contractor's markup in either my estimate or that one, and I apologize if that was not clear to the Harbor Board. I thought that I had mentioned that, so my apologies for that. But we do have some savings. Bill was willing. You know, you don't always get the best negotiating stance when you're negotiating with a contractor who already has a project and you're asking for a change order. You know, you typically don't get much for credits back, you know. But I felt that Bill was very, you know, that we got our credit back for that power transformer. So I know that there is, you know, and Nick and I have discussed this, there is some structural credit that should come back with this, but sometimes in these types of things you don't see it, and sometimes you do. So I think Nick is being, you know, very prudent in coming up with a number that would put a general contractor's markup on bills, plus charge for this extra structural work.
So let's just do that. If there was 120 grand in there from Bill, and say Western Dock and Bridge steps on it, I have to look at the contract to see what they're entitled to, but at most it'd be 15%. It's probably closer to 10, but I'll just put 15 on for now. So that'd take that up to 138. We figured there was $5,000 to $10,000 worth of race work to do for the extra chases, so that's another 10 grand. And then there was a couple of conduit that went up the gangway, and then there was a little bit of remodel or reconfiguration up on the approach dock, right? So I'm just going to say that's another 5,000. And then oops, I just blew that.
You're at 153, Dick.
Okay, and then we have a new transformer that Joe's going to provide, right?
Yes.
So I don't know what that is. I'm at
Joe's shaking his
153
head
without
there.
the
He doesn't
transformer.
either.
So that's how I said 150 to 175. Yeah, maybe I'm low, maybe I'm high, but I think it's a pretty reasonable number.
What would the cost be for a transformer? Joel could probably answer that.
Yeah, the question I have is that I don't understand where this additional load is coming from. You're saying you're going to have to go from a 1200 amp service to a 1600 amp service, when I know that when you designed for the 1200, you had to have at least 20% leeway in there. I don't see where all this additional load is coming from. It seems to me like that's overblown. What is it? We're going from I forget the transformer size. We want to go from a 225 to a 300, or is
300 to a 500.
well 300 to a 500? Yeah, where's this extra 200 kW load coming from? We're only talking about a couple of boats here.
Okay, to answer Joe's question, what we've done is we have designed a solution in option 1 that provides a 400 amp 480 volt panel down on the float. We would install that right next to panel 1N, which is a panel that's currently in the design down on float 1, about 2/3 of the way out. And that 480 volt panel would be fed from a transformer up on the approach dock, separate from Joe's transformer, because we have to take the 208 volt power that Joe provides the harbor and run it through that switchboard that he was talking about, and then we come out to a breaker, to a transformer, and steps the voltage up to 480, and then we run new feeders down the float to a new panel down there. One 100 amp service would go to the Kestrel, and then you've got 300 amps left. You could give Chris a 100 amp service, and then you would have two 100 amp receptacle capacity left, or you could have three 60 amp receptacle capacity left. So what I'm trying to do is take this cost that you're facing, this additional cost, and instead of spreading it over, one boat, Chris's, you're spreading it over multiple boats, depending on the amps that you give them, and depending on whether, Chris, if you could live with a 60 amp, I don't know if you can or not, but if you could, then that would be more capacity than you'd have. You would have 300 amps divided by 60 is 5. You could have up to 5 more boats besides the Kestrel and 480. So I'm trying to provide some diversity for the harbor for the future. And that's why I'm stepping up the transformer, and that's why I'm stepping up the switchboard, so that we can take advantage of that extra capacity down on the float. So you're not trying to pass all of this on one service, one receptacle.
So, Mark, if you were to not change out that switch gear from 1200 to 1600, you would have to do that in the future?
Right. Yeah, and I can't add. Joe is right about the 20%. However, I've specified 100% rated circuit breakers so that I can use them right to their full capacity. But we did have extra capacity in the entire system, and when we changed the design at the 11th hour to add this power center at the Kestrel, I took most of that spare capacity out to do that. And the harbor is legal. The design meets the National Electrical Code, but I sharpened the pencil as much as I possibly could to squeeze enough energy out to give the Kestrel their 100 amps, and we just can't do that for any more. We have enough power in the system to handle the receptacles, the pedestals that we have in the system. A contractor would say that you could add more. Don't worry about it. And I know Bill has told that to certain members of the community there, that, Mark designs to a certain degree, but you can actually get away with more. But we have to design to the electrical code. The cost difference, I talked to Bill Shattenberg a lot during this process, and the cost difference to go from a 1200 amp switchboard to a 1600 amp switchboard is less than $5,000. So I had no problem doing that, both for capacity for this option one, and to get a little grace back into your system for the future for other things as well.
But if you were to then have to add a switchboard, a 1600 amp switchboard later, what would be?
Oh, Lord in heaven. I mean, $50,000?
Yeah, so it makes sense to do it now.
What about the labor to install it?
Well, I was going to say, so in a sense, you're talking 5,000 more for that 1,200 to 1,600, and then you've got the extra 5,000 for the construction there, reconstructing the base that it's going to sit on it.
No, the switchboard that we're talking about is the big the big rectangular one that sits right out on the end of the approach dock. And the physical size of that switchboard is not changing as we change its ampacity. The piece of equipment that you're referring to that gets a little bit bigger, that's Joe's service transformer. That's the utility transformer that would go from a 300 kW to a 500 kW.
So
to give the harbor that capacity. I'm sorry?
So we're still asking Joe to go to that 500?
Yes, I mean you could stay with the 300, but if I'm using a 28% diversity factor right now. In other words, the harbor is only going to use 28% of the capacity of all the receptacles down there. That's what the electrical code allows us to do that. And if we don't up the transformer on Joe's side, then he's assuming even more diversity, and I'm just not comfortable doing that.
Joe has a question.
What diversity are you using for these 4 new receptacles? It looks to me like you're saying it's 100% of 4 receptacles.
Well, the electrical at the panel itself, Joe, because I've only got 4 receptacles at the panel, it's like 90% right at the panel. So that's what I have to size the panel for. So it's sized for 400 amps, and the feeders that provide it are 400 amps. And I have a 300 kW transformer, Joe, on the approach dock to step the power up. It's the same size as the transformer that feeds the whole harbor, because because I'm only allowed a 90% diversity on that panel because there's only 4 receptacles. But then so the feeder out of the switchboard, the step-up transformer, the feeder down to the float, the panel on the float, that's all got a 90% diversity. But then when I bring that into the total harbor load, then it doesn't go up much at all. My calculations were there. I think I CC'd you, but I think we go from like 1,000 amps, Joe, to like 1,050 or something like that. It's like 40 or 50 amps more. It's not very much when we factor all the rest of it in. But the reason why the electrical code allows you to do that is because we have like 147 receptacles in the harbor. So that the electrical code assumes out of 147 users that, only 28% of the users are using at full capacity. But this harbor is not configured that way. This harbor has a lot of receptacles, but they're for all those gill netters. We've got 80% of the energy in the harbor being used by 20% of the boats when we come to capacity. What you're capable of pulling off of your pedestal. Those 208 3-phase pedestals and now these 480 3-phase pedestals, they pull the lion's share of energy out of the harbor. So I'm using the electrical code to your advantage in terms of capital costs, construction costs, but somebody could make the case, well, Mark, maybe you're being a little too aggressive on your calculations. And I'm like, yeah, I would be if everybody fired up their 480 and 208 and ran their pedestals full bore, but the likelihood of that happening is so low that I don't think it's worth incurring the community's capital cost to provide for that capacity. A few people can do that, but most people that have those 3-phase loads are not going to run them heavily until they get their first power bill anyways.
Glow?
Mark, we have how many 3-phase 100-amp receptacles on that north side? Is there any way we could scab together enough leftover to put another $30,000 transformer on the end for Chris?
I can't do it.
If we reduced those 100-amp services to 60-amp services like we have on the north side of Sea Float?
Well, if I reduce them, yes. If we reduce the 100-amp receptacles down to 60, then that would provide us more capacity, and we could take a look at that, Glow.
I mean, maybe.
But for somebody that's currently got, some of your vessels right now, you said 60 amps at 480 is what some of the vessels have right now?
Well, yeah, we have these 480s that are out there now, I believe. Unless the Kestrel's is different, theirs could be different. But I think those other two are 60 amp. But what I'm thinking is, our fleet right now, those that are using that 3-phase are the majority of them. We only have 1,200 amp 3 phases. The majority of the South Harbor are 60 amp 3-phase. Could we reduce some of those 100 amp 3-phase on the inner stalls, the seine boat class, and get enough power to get Chris enough 60 amp 480 on the end there?
Well, we could certainly look at how many we would have to switch from 100 to 60 in order to do that. We could certainly look at that.
Because that power center, 35 grand? Do you have to run more wire? Do you have to do all this other stuff, or is it just matter? We have a raceway there, correct? Because we can put right off of his starboard bow, I think.
Yeah, we could take a look at that, but
and do 2.
But Joe, but Glow, I would, as your consultant, I would prefer that you not do that.
I know.
Because I've already kind of cut corners and, I've already done that once with the design to come up with energy user at one point in the system when I've got such a high diversity factor on it, and to do it again, it just, I could take a look at it, but I don't like that. As an engineer, I don't like that. I've already done that once. The best thing for me as an engineer would have been tell you when you wanted 480 for the Kestrel Starry Glow, this design doesn't accommodate that. But I kind of, I did what I could do and stretch things and, squeezed out the last little bit out of the, squeezing orange juice out of an orange to come up with this. And I could do that. I could rob from Peter to pay Paul some more. But again, it consolidates more energy in one location in the harbor, and we're kind of going against the direction of what would be good engineering judgment to do that.
I want to just throw something in here. I'm not counting 12 100 amp services out there already. We reduced those on the north side of float 1 down to
I know we did south
60
side.
amp.
Oh, we did already?
Yeah, so
Okay.
the only 100 amp services you have, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 7 at 100 amps.
Yeah.
The rest of them on the north side of float 1 were reduced already to 60.
These are 208s you're talking about.
Yeah, 208.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Dick. I don't have a set of drawings with me.
That's the same number I was thinking. I was hoping that you could reduce the rest of the hundreds down to 60s and get enough so that we just went straight 50-60 split there, and then scab together enough to get Chris a transformer at the end as an option.
Well, can I jump in here real quick? This is Kurt. I was plugged in at one time to 60 amp over in that north or the South Harbor there when I was over by the Tony Moran there for a while. And if I turned on my crane and for some reason I wanted to work at night, I turned on my happy lights on the back, which only consist of 6,000 watts. I'd blow a breaker. The breaker would blow. So 60 amps would be, I could keep the dose pumps going, that's for sure. So, but if it would help out Chris, I could take one for the team too.
I had no one else has a question. I had a question earlier when we were adding up the dollar value. We came to 153,000 without a transformer that someone suggested that Petersburg Municipal Power and Light was going to supply. What is the cost of that 500 kW transformer versus the 300? Or am I misunderstanding? I'm just trying to get a total dollar value on this expenditure for the harbor. So we have an accurate number we're talking about. That makes sense? Am I out in space?
Well, it'd be an accurate engineer's estimate, but it's not a proposal from a contractor, so that's just the difference.
Right, 153, but then I thought we had a transformer that had to go on top of that someone had to buy.
Right, that's true.
So what's that cost? Joe, do you have any idea?
Joe would know that.
No, shaking his head.
But that's also the difference between what's already scheduled and accounted for, so it's just a little bit more expensive in theory.
It's a whole new unit.
Yes.
A little
But-
bit more than $153,000.
Right,
It
but,
would
but,
be at least
but that this
$10,000
unit
for-
hasn't been
Another
purchased,
additional.
and so it's just a matter of buying a bigger.
Differential is at least $10,000 between the 300 and 500.
Okay, so there's an extra 10 grand. That's all I was
Okay.
asking.
Or
So
more.
In my mind, listening to Mr. Walter talk and not having enough amperage with the 60 amp service in the South Harbor to run his crane, I guess fire up your generator. It's just my thought, and I'm just being honest, that's the way I thought.
So you'd be on board with reducing the 7?
Mark said he couldn't do it, right?
You didn't want to.
Didn't suggest that would not be a good
We
idea.
don't, it seems like an awful lot of money. It's 10% of the cost of the whole electrical in the North Harbor to add this, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or more, 1.2 million?
1.5.
Yeah, but when you look
1.6.
at it, I'm not arguing for or against. I'm just trying to help you folks make your decision. When you look at it, that one panel, that 480 volt panel, I have to give a transformer to power that panel that is the same as the transformer that powers the entire harbor. Right now in the design, Joe's going to power the whole harbor with 300 kW. That one panel to step the voltage from 208 to 480 is a 300 kW panel. We're talking, it is a very small number of receptacles, but relatively speaking, it is a huge amount of energy. You're increasing the total capacity of your harbor 50% effectively for 10% of the cost. So it's a very difficult thing to think about from that standpoint. It's a little odd.
Now, Mark, a question on that option one. I think you were saying last week we were talking about it, that if we go with option one, it'll give us the option in the future. I mean, we will be able to get four 480 hookups, but the raceways and et cetera of the conduits, 20 years from now, would that help us increasing the power down there to increasing the 480 or not?
Yes.
In order to have those 4 hookups?
No, I'm just looking down the road 20 years. If we go with option one, 20 years from now, if we decide 4 units of 480 aren't enough, we want to add 2 more or 4 more.
No, no. In order for us to go past 4, then we need to talk about a new service to the harbor. We're basically, what you guys have is a 208 volt harbor that we're trying to add some 480 volt power to. If somebody were to come at this knowing that they're to provide a 480 volt harbor with this large energy, we would start with a 480 volt service, and we would have 480 volt switchgear. And then we would have a 300 kW transformer that would step the power down to 208 and feed another switchboard, which would feed all of the 208 in the harbor with that 300 kW, the same size that Joe's providing now. See what I'm saying? And, and we would put in a 1600 or amp 480 volt switchboard for which we could feed lots of 480 volt power. We've got it exactly backwards because we never designed a 480 volt harbor to begin with. So what we're trying to do is squeeze as much as we possibly can out of a 208 volt system to get 480. If you do any more than that, the size of the wire that you need to bring into your 208 volt system gets so ridiculously large that you would just say, no, we're not doing that. We're just going to start over, get Joe to bring down another transformer. This one is going to be a 480 volt, put in a 480 volt panel at the top of the dock, and feed 480 volt power down there. That's how you would handle additional capacity.
Okay, anybody have any more questions for these guys? And we just have to figure out whether we want to try to do this or not do it.
I'm okay on the technical end here. I got enough.
Anything else that we let these guys go? What do you think? Okay, well, thanks, Mark and Dick, and we'll sit here and hash this over a little bit more, and get in touch with you whatever we decide as soon as we can.
It's on the agenda on Monday's meeting, so
Yeah,
so they'd get
the
their
assembly will make the final call, and so you'll be the first ones to know after the assembly meeting.
Okay, very good. Good luck with your deliberations.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Okay, see you.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Mike, look, I don't have to go, do I? You guys,
No.
you guys just hang up.
No?
Yeah, we'll just put you on mute.
No, that's fine. Go ahead. You can put me on mute. I want to hear what you guys have to say now.
Well, what do you guys think? From my perspective, it seems like a good thing to do to have 480, but it's figuring out how to pay for it. I mean, that's the bottom line for me. If there was some way we could do share in the expense, like the harbor pay for part of it, and Power and Light pay for part of it. Maybe Chris would want to pay for a third, or part of it. I'm just kind of,
I
any
got a
ideas?
question to bring that up. You know, all this is cool. I appreciate the Kestrel being here in town and good for them. I just wanna know why they, understand they're the state boat, maybe they put a lot of money in the harbor. But we were actually, and I was informed too, this was maybe a deal we had with the City Light, the Murphy, when we had it, but, you know, we were there before the Kestrel, but I understand the Kestrel, you know, it's a state boat and all that stuff, but if they're getting it, and basically too, I guess I'd like to state that I'd like, personally, I'm looking at the future type thing. I might hopefully run my boat for another 15 years, maybe just 1 year, depending on your health conditions, who knows. But anyway, that's just my 2 bits in. I'm hoping it happens. If it doesn't, I can still live with it. I'll be here and whatever. And Mark brought up about a deal about somebody cranking the auxiliary. Sometimes we still do, but you know, if the Kestrels, you know, they had to do it in the past too. I understand the Kestrel's held in high esteem, and we want to keep them here. Oh, that's cool. I'm not going anywhere no matter what you guys decide. But it just rubs me the wrong way that they're getting this 100 amp thing, and the rest of us are gonna make ends meet. Whatever. I'm not going anyplace anyway. But I just got to put that 2 bits in. And
Yeah.
you know, good for the Kestrel. I want to keep them here, the job and everything else. But they were the last in the pecking order to hook up to that service down there that Murphy originally paid for. That's just my own personal.
Yeah, well, you know, backing up a little bit, when we designed, we're going through the design phase with the harbor, we struggled with even supplying 480 for them.
Yeah.
And it was a thing where we were just trying to make it work to where we could afford to put the harbor in.
Right.
And then it came up that, well, they were talking about moving, or, you know, who knows what all came about as far as the ideas that we could squeeze one service out of this system the way it was, and that was where we were at. We could afford to do that, and then, you know, I don't know where you were when that was all happening, but it was a struggle for us to come up to the decision to even let the Kestrel have the power.
Originally, when I first started talking to Mark, he was throwing out these figures like 6,000-7,000. I'm going, hey, you know, that's cool. I'll back out of it. So, but then when the talk around that there was, it wasn't going to be such a huge, you know, 600,000. I don't want to put a burden on the city or anything. I'll just run it the way it is. But then now you're talking different numbers other than the, you know, $600,000 shortfall, and then you're talking. Well, like I said, I'm.
Yeah,
well, numbers off the top of my head.
It all came about, Chris. We figured we could make the one hookup out of the existing system that we could afford, and that was where we're at. So now this comes to the attention that maybe this is a wave of the future. You know, maybe we're going to need some more 480, but it's figuring out how to pay for it. And yeah, Jeff.
What's this boat that Wall just built for somebody? The Kaya?
Kaya.
What is it? What boat is it?
It's a jumbo strainer.
Yeah, they're
Just pulled in
on their
yesterday?
way
It
down
looks
to
exactly
Seattle.
like the Robert Magnus.
So in there, and who owns it?
Aleutian Enterprise.
So they're
something.
going where? Somewhere, not here.
Going from
They've been
here
out
to
west.
Seattle.
They're going to
Seattle.
Seattle.
Oh, it just happens to be passing
He stopped
through.
in for 6
Oh,
hours.
okay.
Yes.
Okay. But they
Dan Wormwood.
wired that
That's why they came to pay for it.
480.
I don't. That's news to
Fair
me.
enough.
I don't know. I don't
Somebody
have
said.
any idea.
Yeah, their system's set up for 480.
Not 208. Or
But I'm
better.
not sure where they how they plug in. You know, I'm sure their pump, hydraulics are 480, but their domestic power. Do you have a plug for 208 or?
Actually, I do for when I go to Seward because they only supply 480.
Right. And
So-
so
In Seward,
that,
you do
that leaves you
208.
not being able to run your hydraulic motors.
Yeah, but you know what? You just make ends meet with what, just like the Kestrel now. You guys are going to supply them so they don't have to crank up the silver to and the hydraulics.
Right.
So Chris, when you go to Seward,
Thanks,
you
Joe.
hook up 208
I got
shore
another
power
meeting.
just for house lights?
Yeah, that's what you get out of 280.
And
Because the
Seward-
services,
You get your-
services aren't that.
Does the Seward Harbor have a 480
No, they
option?
do not.
No.
And they don't really do it. Anyway, you'd have to ask them the details, but I just looked up the 280 because they don't afford it.
Well, so
And
any
there's potential to put a 100+ foot boat in the 70-foot slips.
Well,
Yeah, it sounds
our-
like 120 is kind of the range for,
in a 75-foot stall, we go up to maybe 90 feet.
yeah. Because hypothetically, if we got a transient cruise ship that wants to stay for the winter,
You're not going to put them in a 75-foot stall.
Now, when we
Our
were doing-
rules say within 10 feet.
Right.
When we were doing our research there a couple weeks ago, was it Kodiak that had 480?
Nope, nobody has. I think there's
Dutch.
Harbor is talking about putting in 480. They are finding in their 120-foot stall class. They're talking about putting one. They just built the Carl Moses Harbor up there,
Yeah.
and they went all 208 3-phase 100 amp, which is what we have, and they are regretting that in their 120-foot stalls. And so they are going. They're working on it right now to retro that up to 480 for those, for the 180
Right,
footers.
right, the big cake grabbers, yeah.
So, and it's the draggy
Well,
fleet.
hey, Glo, I got a question for you here. Going to that piece of paper that Jody gave you guys there on the harbor funding remaining number.
Yeah, right.
And then the line item there, that C&D engineering / inspection, 483,955. How
Right.
much of that is engineering and how much is that is inspection?
I think that's all inspection, and we've already signed a contract with
Yeah.
them for that.
Yeah. We spent the 502 already to design the harbor, and now the engineering and inspection it's broken down into, it includes Mark Morris's, it includes having a guy here, it includes all the stuff that goes in it. It started out at 550,000, and I talked him down to 483.
Right. So yeah, I hate to operate on assumptions, but any idea what portion of that 483 is inspection?
No, I can't. I want to say 160,000, something like that. I don't know.
I guess my point is, I've sat in on 3 projects here now working with PN&D, and they've had inspectors and everything else, and it seems like in the end we've always had to come back and replace and repair something that that they've put in that they've overlooked. So how much do we really need of inspection from them if we're just going to have to do it anyway?
Well, it's 50 hours. It was down from 60 hours to 50 hours, and
Is that what it is? Okay, that's the numbers I needed to have in my head.
50 hours.
$10,000 an hour.
36 weeks. I think 36 weeks.
So what do you guys think, whether this is a good idea to try to come up with the funding for this, or how do you feel?
Where is this money now? This is just imaginary money here, this?
Well, okay, so you can start at the 9, and you can work down what we've spent, getting down to that contingency line. So we have the contingency of 8% we haven't eaten into that. So if we do eat into all of that because of whatever, we should have 186. Now we hope to not eat into that contingency at all, and we'd have, so 700,000,
So what
7 plus.
happens to that money?
Well, that's in our savings. This is outright harbor money. Where this money came from, if you remember, is 3.5 million came from the harbor deferred maintenance in our savings. We matched it and got it up to 7, so that's another 3.5. Then we took we got awarded 126 or 1.26 from Power and Light, and 200,000 from the general fund, the property development, which we had to give back so that they could, because the baler went up and over, so we took 200,000 out, and then the assembly applied it to the dredge spoils up at the baler. So roughly it's that 600,000 that we had last year from our raw fish tax that went right into this. So that's what you're looking at as having leftovers, 700,000 if we
And we could roll
don't
that
change.
into the harbor reserve and use it.
It's
for-
in the harbor
use it
reserve.
for matching
Oh, it
funds.
is the harbor reserve.
Oh, it is.
Yep, it's the harbor reserve.
It's just for depleted.
It's just our savings.
Yeah,
Yep.
but doing this project would deplete the,
Oh, we're
The
bone
fund.
dry. Yeah, we're sucking air in the harbor savings right now because it's all applied into this. But if whatever you
if
left
there's any
over
contingencies left over,
goes back into our savings.
yeah, yeah.
Kind of like to
Yeah.
retro wire it then, though.
No, we can't do it.
Yeah.
Well, this is it, people.
Do it now or
You've
not
got
do
to do it
Yeah.
now, because the builder is down building those floats, and he's continuing on, but we gotta put another chaseway in if we're gonna do it to the end of those floats, or so.
I'd like to see us kind of share the cost. I wonder if the Assembly would consider that, as far as, instead of eating into our reserves solely, is to
Splitting it?
pay some of the infrastructure a little bit out of the power and light, you know, pay for part of it, we pay for part of it. We have something for down the road, and we're not depleting either enterprise fund. Oh, just a thought.
I think the people that had their rates raised this last year aren't gonna look kindly on spending $150,000 to $200,000 more to put in the system, when that money could possibly end up being in savings in the Harbor Fund.
For deferred maintenance.
For
Yeah, or
future.
whatever, yeah.
You know, we've been talking about building up the Harbor Fund, and
Well, right now,
that's the way I see
Right,
it.
but we gotta look at the future, you know, and they got theirs, you know, they got, you know, down there, they got what they need
I
down
might
there.
just add one last thing here, and then I'm gonna be quiet here. And that was something I was just thinking about. You know, the amount of raw fish tax that comes in from, you know, from those boats out there that are going to require, you know, or wanting, you know, requesting 483 phase. You know, a big portion of this money that we're able to spend, you know, comes from those guys. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Comes from who?
It comes from those guys that bring raw fish tax.
We always come here.
And
I live here.
And also a big part of it comes from the rest of the fleet that uses the 208. I don't think Chris needs to have the 480. He says he uses 208 in Seward, and he can start up his auxiliary if he needs to use
Just the
more
Kestrel
power.
can too, Jeff.
The Kestrel's a different setup.
Is it?
They paid for half of that float out
Okay, I
there.
can't argue that. I don't
So-
have 20 million to piss into the fund.
Yeah,
for it.
right.
So what about Eric's new boat? I wonder,
He's
He's 208.
208?
He's 208,
Yeah.
yeah.
And if the
That seems
typical
to be
boat
kind of a narrow
size is
view, because to me
120,
that's
the
looking like the here and
reuse
now instead of the future, and that's kind of where I'm looking at it. I mean, I've got about another 20 years left in this business, you know, so I'm trying to think where I might be ended up in 20 years instead of just tomorrow.
the old folks home.
I suppose so. Save a room for me.
Yeah, I'll be right next door to you.
Yeah, oh, good.
so what do you think, Mark?
Well, I'm all for thinking ahead too, but when you have the report from the Delta fishing vessel owners, Platypus and Fred Wall, and the boats that they're building that would use the size stalls that we're talking about putting 480 in, looks like 90% of them, I don't know the percentage, most of them, I guess is the more accurate way to put it, use 208.
Unless they're bigger than they're gonna fit in those slips out there.
That's just my.
Other than
rationale.
the Kestrel
I'm not
slip.
trying to take anything away from anybody that had a service before, and we've dedicated service to the Kestrel, so we're kind of, you know, committed to that. I don't know, it's a tough decision. I'm just looking at the money and
Well, you know, the thing about it is, I mean, I appreciate what, just from my standpoint, is that it'd be nice if Power and Light kicked in on it, because they're the ones that can charge Chris higher rate for using this fancier power. We can't necessarily in the harbor recoup a lot of that. I mean, he's paying the same, pretty much the same amount as the Kestrel. I mean, you know, I can't charge a guy that's using 30 amps versus a guy that's charging 480 any difference in moorage. You know, and so, but what I'm saying is that perhaps Power and Light could factor in on their side to recoup some of the initial investment. I mean, I know they already do that. Our power down in the harbor is more expensive than our home power. So obviously they're doing that already in order to recoup, because we have fancy power down there. Would the assembly, you guys, would you
The
Share-
feedback I'm getting from my particular constituency that has approached me about harbor things
Yeah,
is it's time for the general population to stop subsidizing harbor issues.
well, they aren't, I mean, I don't know that the general population is subsidizing. We're an enterprise fund that is not dependent upon anything more than our moorage. And in fact, we subsidize the general fund in many ways by paying for the lobbyist in DC and you know, a lot of the infrastructure that is supporting Power and Light has been bought with harbor money and turned over to Power and Light to rent back to us. So, I mean, is there any way, you know, from that standpoint that you guys would consider kicking in a little bit more from
where?
from Power and Light? I know they
I would not go there
You
after
would.
taking 1.25 million out of that.
For a
because if
1.6
one of their diesels burns
I know,
up,
yeah,
it's $1.5 million.
I know, yeah.
And
I
we
get
don't
it.
have any backup hydro.
I
And I
get
don't know what Joe's
right.
bank account is right now.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I don't,
Well, he paid roughly, Power and Light paid roughly 1.2 million for a $1.6 million infrastructure down there. So that's a
which
pretty
is
good
the
deal.
precedent we're starting to set. If we expect
Exactly.
every enterprise fund to do that, then
Yeah,
every time you build something down there, the sanitation has to pay for the sewer, the water has to pay for the water, and then so those
Yeah.
rates have to go up. Either that or
exactly.
we have to have individual water meters down there. What's that cost gonna be? I
Well,
mean,
we do, and we do pay.
Well, we split, I mean, to each stall, but I mean.
Right, we
getting
do as a
back to
harbor pay
something
for our
you
own
mentioned
water.
about the users of this 480 paying more, I think it would, I don't know, I'm not an electrician, but I talked to
Uh-huh.
someone that knows a little bit about electricity. If you have a 480 volt service,
Yeah.
you draw half the amps, and I don't know the formula, but you get charged per kilowatt hour. And I think it's the same, you're gonna burn the same amount of wattage, and that's what you're gonna draw the same amount of
Meters.
kilowatts.
Oh,
So you're gonna pay the same, you're not gonna,
So-
unless you up the rate per kilowatt hour for a 480 service.
or just the service fee.
Yeah,
You know,
I don't
I'm
know
just
how it's
trying to
gonna work,
think
but-
of,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
don't know.
somehow we could get Chris the power.
It's the stage of the game that we're at now, that we have to make a decision. It sounds like Monday, because, I mean, the bid's been awarded, the guys ordered the floats, I mean,
Right.
Yeah, this is the 11th hour, and that's, I wish we would have
I don't know. It's a,
approached this earlier,
that's-
but
we're gonna talk about
Yeah.
it Monday, so everybody just come and present their case, and we'll.
I mean,
But
yeah.
I don't know
you
what the
know.
recommendation from the harbor board's gonna be at this point.
Well, if it wasn't for Chris having gone down the 480 road with the assumption that it would stay, I wouldn't even be thinking about this anymore. I'd say absolutely not. So to me, I'm okay with the Kestrel because of their contributions to that float out there. And I don't know what, just don't think we can take care of Chris on this. It's too much money.
So the value of the Kestrel's contribution was 500 and some thousand for half that float, and then the 4 jobs that it provides in town, and the 483 phase it burns, and so there's no consideration for raw fish tax brought in by guys that would like to have 483 phase. And the 4 or 5 jobs that he's has in town that will be paying more than what the Kestrel guys make. I mean, are we looking at the bigger picture here, or are we just looking at a
well, the
picture?
bigger picture is that the state gave us like $20 million to fix up the
But like
waterfront.
the state was going to give us $20 million for the harbors no matter what, and didn't come out of the Kestrel's fund. It came out of the DOT thing.
But it's still state money.
Well,
It's
I know,
tax
but
money.
don't associate the state with the Kestrel, because the Kestrel itself did not give us that money. We would have gotten that money whether the Kestrel was laying here or not.
Correct.
Okay, so let's don't use that number anymore.
Why not? I like that.
And I'm looking at the 4 jobs that Chris has got on his boat that are local hire, most of those guys. And it's way more money than what the Kestrel's paying on their guys. Chris pays darn near the same amount of money in moorage as the Kestrel. And the Kestrel could be gone tomorrow. It's the state boat. It could do whatever it wants.
Exactly, that's why we have to keep them
Anyway.
happy.
Then Chris could have that plug-in.
There's no guarantee though, Jeff, because maybe you'll get the plug-in for your boys, who knows?
I doubt it.
I
There's
think
no guarantee that I get the plug-in.
208
Yeah.
matches the stalls we have. Those are 75-foot stalls, 208's the standard. Nobody's proposed that it's gonna change anytime in the future for 75-foot stalls. So I think it's enough.
Well, there's nothing to say in the future, we don't drive a couple more piles and make them 100-foot stalls.
I don't think we'll have the empty space.
No, I'm just saying right there, behind the westerly, you could drive a couple more piles and extend the dock out and make it a bigger
How
stall.
wide are those new boats gonna be? If they're 119 footers, they're gonna be,
They're just stretching them to fit their width.
True.
I don't know.
Yeah, I have a tough time taking what little bit of money we have in our reserve fund and spending it for this project, but I can see where it is important, and I could see to where if we could spread the cost around, it wouldn't be a bad idea, but that's just my
Even
own
if
thought.
this was, if it was halved, it would still be too much for me.
So,
I think I'd be on board with it if we were contributing about a third of it. You know, if we could get two other entities involved in the.
like 60,000.
I could do a third.
So we'd be looking at $60,000 from 3 different sources.
Yeah.
60,000 is reasonable, and
I guess.
yeah, I don't understand, but I mean, it would give us future option, which we won't be able to do in the future if we don't do it now.
Right, and with that other service, it actually increases the power potential, that you can split it up in a lot of different ways down there with the option
Right.
one.
Yeah, because he
Which
said he
sounds
can
like
replace
a good
those
thing.
power heads and make it 208, 100 amp,
Yeah,
you know.
And that's where I am too, just because we have maxed out. We are maxed out. We can't add another light bulb, nothing. And I'm nervous about that. But
No,
is
it
it
would be
worth
very nice.
100 and, you know,
It'd be
it's
very
up to
nice
you
to have
guys.
the
I'll do
option,
whatever,
give
but
us the option, but-
And Morris said if we go down that road, we get some of that cushion back with
Yes.
this whole design.
yes, definitely.
And we have the potential of making a 208.
Yeah,
Mhm.
like in
100
the
amp.
South Harbor, we're maxed out. What we'd have to do in order to put an extension on D float is we would have to start taking away those 100 amp services to get a little bit more on the end. We are completely maxed out in the South Harbor. We don't have any. So that's kind of been our protocol. We have always done that. We've tried to get as much as we can and don't really plan for the future all that well, to the point where I have the end of C float, I have 4 60 amp 3-phase services out there. That's it. So, you know,
that would be a great place for 480, you know, for the size.
Exactly, but we can't do it. We absolutely can't do it.
We didn't look
Case
at it
in
in the
point.
future
Right.
when
You
they
know,
did the
that's exactly
South
what we're talking about now. I mean, it would be wonderful. I could tie literally 8 boats up out there, but I can really only tie up 4 because I don't have enough power for them out there. And this is this exact same scenario. But, you know,
So their alternative is to run their generators, or, you know.
yeah, hook up and.
For anything major, any major piece of
Yeah.
equipment.
So we end up with, say, the Winters fleet in here. They end up sitting out there with a generator going all winter if they tie up for very long.
They can't use a step-up transformer to run their bilge pumps? I mean,
Yeah, but there isn't enough out there to do much more than that.
that's crazy though. To run a bilge pump, you have to have 100 amps of 480? I mean,
No.
you could do it on,
Well, what I
On the
end up with
extension
is like what now, just make sure you know, we have 4 winter boats tied up side by side, sharing a 60 amp 3-phase power,
280, 208.
208. There is no 480 out
One-
there.
one
There is
circuit?
no one circuit, yes. So it
That gets
isn't, you know,
stretched
it's down, down, down. So we can't use Sea Float to its maximum capacity. When Chris goes out there, because that's the only place I can tie him during this winter, you know, that's all I can offer him. And I can only go he and the Kestrel out there, that's it. I can't double them up, I can't tie, and that float is built to go 3 deep. And it's fine to do it, you know, for 24 hours or whatever.
So, Glow, thinking line here, how far north could we go with that concrete flow to the, that the Kessel's on now, if we could add it? And, you know, what if we, you know, decided that, you know, we had some vessels that wanted to spend some time here? Do we have property to the north there that we wouldn't be encroaching on Icicle or any of these, if we wanted to say extend that another 100 feet?
Well, you could, probably not. No, you're getting out there too far, because then it would hang out further than the face of the docks. But what you could be talking about is putting another transient float in, like we are taking away now. What you could be talking about is stepping up and giving 3-phase power on the south side of that northern float, which remember, we stripped out of this to save enough money. You know, you could do things like that, because I'm going to be tying up limit size deltas or limit size boats, you know, 20-foot wide, 22-foot wide on the south side of the north float. So across from Chris are now going to be Spicy Ladies. So, and they're only going to have the option to have a 30 or 50 amp split.
You know, I mean, I'm not talking 5 years from now, maybe 10 years from now or something, you know, when the demand is there. Because, like you said, you know, if we would have had any foresight at all, we would have put 480 down sea float. I mean, when we put it in, you know, just so that we could tie up some bigger boats out there, you know, that demanded it.
Certainly.
Hindsight's 25.
Well, yeah.
I have a question. Where are we with the raw fish tax split with the city in the future?
They ratcheted down another 50 grand.
So
They
is it
take the
percentage?
first top 350 this year, and we get whatever's left over. This year it'll be $12 and, you know, and 95 cents. It's not going to be much this year, but hopefully this season will be
So
great.
they take the
next
first
year.
350,000.
Yep.
So we're
Until now, they've been
subsidizing.
taking.
So, you know, if we could get that down to where they take 100,000,
Yeah.
then you'd feel better about a project like this.
Hey, there you go. Hey,
Well,
you
it'd be
guys are
going into the
creative.
harbor reserves.
Yeah.
That's
Well, yes, and this
future.
is what we're
Right,
concerned
that's
about.
where this is coming
building
out
up
of.
the harbor
Exactly.
reserve.
We're supposed to be putting away 800,000 a year.
Yeah.
And we're not even,
852,000
we're not even
this year.
close. So, you know, that's why I still feel like I could go with this if we could figure out a way to split the cost up. That's where I'm at.
Split the cost up or
Three ways we-
retrieve the cost
Yeah.
into the harbor fund.
So one thing I want to be clear on, you said the south side, they have 30 and 50 amp service out on the end.
208, single phase.
Yeah.
Single phase, not 3-phase.
Right, so a lot of those boats, they do have 60 amp plugs in service.
On the north side. of
Well,
Seafloat.
and they're currently in South Harbor,
On the north side of Seafloat.
yeah.
The marathon to, out there to the marsh,
Right.
to Leona.
So
There's
in theory,
3-phase power on that float.
Right,
yeah.
right, but then in the new North Harbor design, on the south side of,
Single phase,
that's,
through,
You know,
I think they would want 60 on
the
that.
last meeting, that was my
so,
position.
and this would give us
Yeah,
that
it's-
option.
Where's the
of
money
doing
coming from?
that, which is
well,
where
if we
I-
split it 3 ways, $60,000 from the harbor would be recouped 50,000 of it just with our fish tax, which we would
Yeah.
love to put away. But I mean, that's one way of looking at it. We're
Yeah.
already
We
getting
already-
a little bit of it back.
Use this year's towards it, that's it.
Yeah, and then, so we're out 10,000, but it's coming up with the other chunks of money. Who's gonna put in the other 120? That's where, I don't know, I just wanna
Well-
spread the cost out. That's bottom line. I could see, like Bob says, we could go a third. That's reasonable, I think.
You agree? Yeah. And it really would benefit a lot more than just, you know, Chris, and with other boats having the options of more power service.
Right, and it gives the harbor the flexibility of changing those two.
Wasn't there potential of 5 60 amp
Yeah.
480s?
Right.
Yeah.
And you
they
could
could be
change that
changed over
to
2 at a
208.
time,
Yeah,
or something like that.
yeah, to 208 100 amp
So,
services.
I think there's a benefit in that. It's just a matter of finding the money.
Yeah, maybe we could get Daniel to get a permanent stall here,
There you go.
because
That
I
would-
know he is 480.
So, do you think we can get this recommendation by ourselves if we word it in in the light of splitting the cost with whoever.
Yeah,
It's
if
worth
you
a
guys
try, I think.
could make a motion and we could vote on it, whether we would like to send that recommendation to the council that we feel this is a good worthwhile project, but we don't want to have to pay for all of it. I mean, it's not just, I mean, it's going to benefit the city, the power and light, the harbor. It's going to benefit a lot, I think, over and possibly in the future. So
Yeah, in the long run, it's.
in the long run, I think it's a good investment.
One question I've got, your plug, is it a real special plug? I haven't really looked at it down there. Is it
You'd have
the
to ask
same?
electrical guys.
It's a Hubble nice big.
So
it's
it's
just
bigger
kinda
than our
scaled
100.
up.
Mhm.
It's like a $2,000 plug. Maybe, I'm guessing.
Our,
A
yeah,
lot
our-
of times, I know, when I had to replace them, I was responsible for my end, and the city was just responsible for the receptacle. They didn't wanna,
it's about, is it running about 100,000?
you
I
know,
mean,
I'm
about
not-
1,000.
I'm not the right person to ask. You'd have to ask people that don't know what the right person.
Our, when we replaced the 100 amp 3-phase cost us $675.
Yeah,
'Cause
the,
I like
the,
to
the
have a
60
couple
amp
on hand.
plugs are like
Or
500 each.
480,
so.
something like that.
Chris, is the Seward power 100 amp 208 or 60 amp 208? Do you
I
know?
think it's 60, but you'd have to,
60
I'd
amp
just be
208.
taking numbers off the top of my head. I'm not positive. I have to ask him.
And another thing that we could, include in the recommendation is for wherever the monies come from, whether it's power, some of it comes from Power and Light or Harbor City, maybe some of that cost could be worked into additional fees for hooking up. So it's, you know, Chris would have to pay a little bit more for his hookup to 480, and the Kestrel as well.
$9 service fee isn't enough.
I'm just, that's
And
another
the point
option
of
to
going to
help.
480 is that you get some more efficiency out of it.
Yeah, well,
So there goes your efficiency. Cost
I'm just,
savings.
yeah.
What's happening to all the 480 stuff that's there now?
Used.
Is it usable,
Yeah.
salvageable?
Oh,
Could it be
no.
taken?
We have fires about once a year on stuff
I
like
mean,
that out
could
there.
that stuff be put as like a private mooring?
Well, he'll
place?
keep his end.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't you put that on the piston and rudder dock or something and have a private 480 moorage? Or, I mean,
If there's enough power
would
to,
it be worth somebody's time to salvage that wire and transformer and pedestal and all that stuff?
yeah, they're doing that already. They're doing that already. Everybody's salvaging everything that they.
That's
I'm
part
sure
of,
always power
what's
looks
his
at it.
name's contract, right?
Okay, so what do you guys want to do? Where are we gonna go?
Well, like I think we hammer out a verbal agreement that we'll agree to.
Well, you can try it through a motion.
You want us to blunder around here, cough up a motion?
Sure, I'd entertain that, and then we can amend it or discuss it a little bit, but we need something to discuss.
Give it a try, Mr. Martin.
Bob.
I would like to move that we, Harbor Board, contribute 1/3 the cost of this 480 upgrade and encourage Power and Light and the assembly to come up with the other 2/3.
Thinner.
Yeah.
It's called like.
Roughness
Here
tax.
Mayor Mark, we don't need a number amount in there. You pretty much got a handle on what PN&D were saying down here.
160 grand,
Yeah.
but that's kind of a floating thing too, it sounds like.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor to recommend to the assembly that the monies be split, and the harbor fund would put 1/3 up, and then the other 2/3 would come from other city monies. Is that what I'm getting?
Do we want to inject in there, this is option one as laid out by PN&D?
Mark Morris.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Well,
Right
maybe
on.
something about how it expands the power potential of, you know, it's cheaper to do it now, basically.
They don't have to have that in the motion.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Option one.
explanation should be in their
Yeah.
packet, so they should be honed up on all the,
Well, you know, the potential will be for 6 480s. One 100 and 5 60.
60s. Yeah. So we're given the option of expanding our electrical capacity in the North Harbor, and all that'll like be explained to the assembly. So our motion though is just saying that we're willing to use some of our contingency money or whatever we have in our reserves, a third of it, and then the assembly can figure out how to come up with the other 2/3. That's what that's.
Yeah. So if the assembly isn't able to magically make some funds, then would we go up to half, or is there a certain point, you know, rather than let it fail at a certain point where?
You gotta keep in mind all along, in my opinion, that the floats are being built as we speak.
Yes.
That's why it has to happen
Today.
Monday.
It's kind of against that deadline.
Right. And so if,
I was wondering, with that, finding that same thing that Joseph's on, do you want to put a percentage on there, or do you want to just put, you know, that you guys are in favor of putting the 480 in, as long as you don't have to float the whole boat?
Well, with the estimate
you
of
anyway.
amount of money, I would go with a third. I don't,
yeah,
unless you
Too
want to
late.
put a dollar
maybe
amount.
half.
I think most of us, if the assembly said, okay, you float 90%, most of us would not be in favor of that. You know, we might be in favor of 40% or 45, but
I said a third, I made a motion.
Yeah, it hasn't been seconded yet.
we're discussing it.
You know, I mean, there's no flexibility at all.
Well, if you have flexibility, then you know it'll go right to that point.
Right.
You know, that's when Bob says 33 1/3% is what we're willing to go.
Unfortunately, our time.
But I
doesn't
wanted to
leave a
talk
lot.
about future fish tax to go to the harbor.
Yeah.
I think that's a place where the council, or whatever they're called now, those guys have a chance to maneuver
This is
in our
easy for
benefit,
us.
the harbor's benefit. So
Well, you can see this year in the budget that the city manager has that direction in mind, because he balanced the budget and gave $50,000 more to the harbor. He realizes what generates the raw fish tax, it's the boats that are.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's put his money.
And that's where
right
I don't understand where the public is thinking that they're subsidizing us when we're subsidizing them. That's I don't know. And I just think that most people don't understand the big picture. And this is gonna be a hard sell because of that, I think, because people just don't get the big picture of what's going on. But with that said, we still have a motion, but it hasn't been seconded.
I
so we
second it.
can't- Okay, so we have a motion to support this proposal to put 480 North Harbor, 5 receptacles, one 100 amp for the Kestrel, and 5 60 amp. That's where we're at.
Potential.
Option
And
one.
potential. And we have a proposal to pay for a third of it. So, any more discussion? The only question I have is like what Joseph's saying, what happens if we do this and send it to the assembly?
It's
See,
their
up to them.
decision,
Yeah.
people. You are
Yeah.
just
Well,
advising
we-
them. They
it's-
could look
it's-
at you and say, you're
It's
paying
dead.
for it all.
You might not
Good
get
idea,
it.
you're paying for it all.
Yeah,
End
that's
of story.
true.
And so if it comes to that and we want to get this done,
I guess you could
are
hand
we
in your
willing to go there?
resignation.
No.
Sure you are, it's their
No.
money. You
No.
are just advising
Wants
them.
to take all the money out of the harbor.
You're the
Joseph, unless you're
stepmother.
personally hanging on to it.
Joseph, if they came and said, well, we're gonna give you another 50,000 additional to the harbor fund off the fish tax, then we could reconsider. But we're not gonna have another meeting.
right,
No,
right.
no.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we've, okay, the
Call for
question's been
question.
called. Okay, all those in favor of sending this recommendation to the assembly, respond by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Okay, motion carries. That's it. Okay, I will adjourn. Thanks, you guys. This has been a tough thing to overcome, but, you know, appreciate everybody showing up.
Thanks for your work there, Mike. I'm gonna go.